There are moments when we ask ourselves, why is my life like this? Why is it so hard to find happiness? You fight, you push forward, you smile on the outside, but inside, something is missing. You compare yourself, you blame yourself, you feel like you don't fit in, as if complaining has become part of your daily routine, as if life handed you an unfair role from the very beginning. Today I'm going to tell you a different story. The story of a crow who was born with everything against him, a creature condemned to rejection, loneliness, and suffering. But one day, he discovered a truth so simple that it changed his life forever. And if today you feel tired of fighting, empty, lost, this message is for you. Do you want to know how this bird changed what he was? How he found the peace and happiness he had been searching for? Then stay with me until the end. The only thing I ask in return is that you click the subscribe button. Because here, we don't just tell stories. On top of a forgotten rock in the middle of the vast Kansas prairie, under a merciless sun, a small crow was born. From the moment he hatched, life began to punish him. The wind was harsh, the heat unbearable. He knew neither tenderness nor comfort. His siblings, as fragile as he was, did not survive. One by one, they died. And so he learned very early that death came before embrace. He survived, but not because he was strong, but because life, for some reason, had not yet abandoned him. From his first breath, existence taught him that everything would be difficult and that he could only endure. His mother fed him with dead meat, dried blood, the smell of decay. And while other birds ate sweet berries or hunted with pride, he learned that his life was made of what others despised. When he began to become aware of the world around him, the crow, now a juvenile, felt that something inside him didn't fit. From the top of a weathered fence post, he saw in the distance the red-tailed hawk, powerful and swift, hunting fresh meat with pride. He watched the bald eagles tearing apart their prey with strength, feeding themselves with honor and admiration. Sometimes the migrating swallows crossed the sky, carrying berries, seeds, or fruits, coming from distant places where there was life, where there was beauty. He, in contrast, only had before him dried carcasses, rotten remains, broken bones under the sun. His food only came when something died, and if nothing died, he didn't eat. So he began to ask himself with pain and anger, why me? Why was I born a crow? Why do I have to search for food among corpses? Why do they flee from me? Why do they fear me? Why do they despise me without even knowing me? Sometimes he dreamed of being a hawk, an eagle, or anything else but what he was. But every time he tried, reality struck him down. His reflection in a shining puddle reminded him that he could not escape his form, nor his destiny. And in that lonely corner of the prairie, his heart began to fill with something more dangerous than hunger and eating waste. He filled himself with resentment, with complaint, and with unhappiness toward himself and toward fate. He felt that life had cursed him. Time passed, and the crow was now fully grown. He had moved away from that place that saw him born. He no longer needed anyone to survive. He knew how to search. He knew how to resist. He had learned to read the prairie, to smell death from afar. He had become an expert in something he never chose: carrion, dry bones, rotten meat, skins baking in the sun. What others avoided with disgust was his daily sustenance. And although his body resisted, his soul was breaking into pieces. He no longer asked out loud why. But inside, the doubt, the complaint, and the unhappiness remained alive like a thorn stuck in his heart. He wandered the prairie aimlessly, with his wings spread, but without purpose. He survived, yes, but he didn't live. He tried to make new friends with other birds, but he was rejected and mocked for being a scavenger. He had accepted that his life was a punishment disguised as existence. He thought that perhaps God had forgotten him, or worse, that God had created him only to suffer. One night, under the cold stars of the prairie, he lay down on the dry grass and whispered to the wind, "If this is the life I was given, what's the point of resisting?" The days that followed were darker still. The crow flew mechanically, his movements devoid of meaning or intention. He watched from afar as the sparrows sang joyfully in the morning, how the cardinals displayed their vibrant red feathers with confidence, how the blue jays commanded respect wherever they went. And he, the crow, was just the shadow that everyone avoided, the figure associated with death and misfortune. He began to believe that his very existence was a mistake, an accident in creation's grand design. Every morning when he woke up, the first thought that invaded his mind was not gratitude for a new day, but rather a deep sadness for having to live it. He felt trapped in a body he despised, playing a role he never auditioned for, living a script he never wrote. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, a vast expanse of tall grass that swayed in the wind like waves in an ocean of gold and green. But for the crow, this beauty meant nothing. He saw only desolation, only the cruel reminder that he was alone in a world that had no place for him. He remembered the early days of his life, when he still had hope that things might change, that he might somehow transform into something different, something acceptable. But as the seasons changed, from the fierce heat of summer to the bitter cold of winter, and then back again, he realized that transformation was impossible. He was what he was, and nothing could change that fundamental truth. This realization didn't bring peace, but rather a resignation tinged with bitterness, an acceptance that felt more like surrender than wisdom. One day, the sun burned hotter than ever before. He had gone several days without eating. His wings felt heavy, his feathers rough, dull, and broken. But what weakened him most was not hunger. It was that deep sadness of unhappiness, the feeling of not belonging anywhere. In the distance, he spotted movement. It was a coyote, stealthy, stalking an unsuspecting rabbit. The crow landed on a fence post and waited. He knew what was coming and thought, "If I'm lucky, I might eat fresh meat for once in my life." The howl broke the silence. The coyote attacked with fury. The rabbit fell. The crow waited patiently. His heart beat with anticipation. But when he tried to approach, the coyote saw him and snarled, "Get out of here, parasite! This isn't for those who wait for others to kill." And with a snap of its jaws in his direction, it sent him scrambling backward. The crow, wounded more in pride than in body, just watched from a distance as the coyote devoured everything, until only bones and fur remained. He dragged himself to the remains, but something inside him was broken. He didn't even have the strength to pick at the fur. He looked at it and left it there. He walked slowly to a small puddle of muddy water. He bent down to drink, but stopped. In the reflection, he saw his sunken eyes, his worn feathers, his hunched figure. "Look at you," he whispered with a trembling voice. "You're a disgrace. Nobody respects you. Nobody waits for you. You are what's left over. What gets in the way? A mistake of creation." He closed his eyes, and for the first time felt that he didn't want to continue anymore. The sun was setting now, painting the prairie sky in shades of orange and purple, a beauty that seemed to mock his misery. He thought about simply staying there by the puddle, letting the cold night take him, letting his suffering finally end. What did it matter? Who would notice his absence? Who would mourn a crow? The world would continue spinning, the other birds would continue their lives, and the prairie would remain as indifferent as it had always been. He had fought so hard for so long, endured so much pain and rejection, and for what? For another day of the same suffering? For another night of cold loneliness? For another morning of waking up to a life he despised? The questions swirled in his mind like a dark storm, each one adding another weight to the burden he already carried. Before I continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like this crow? Have you ever wondered if your struggles have meaning? If you're finding something in this story that resonates with you, consider subscribing to our channel. We share these stories because we believe in the power of transformation, and maybe, just maybe, you're here because you need to hear what comes next. In that silence broken by dark thoughts, he heard the gentle flapping of wings, something different. A mourning dove, a traveler from the south, descended onto a branch of a dead tree that stood beside the puddle. The crow looked at her with surprise. The dove paused and observed him with tenderness. "Friend Crow, are you all right?" The crow didn't respond, just lowered his head. "What happened?" asked the dove again with sweetness. The crow raised his gaze and with a voice almost lifeless, murmured, "I'm tired. Tired of living off scraps, of being seen as the lowest thing. I never asked to be a crow, but that's how I was born. I see the others flying high, hunting with pride, and I only survive among death. Sometimes I think God forgot about me, or that he simply created me to suffer. Look at me. I'm a pile of bones and broken feathers. I have no strength, no purpose. I'm not happy. I just exist, dragging myself through what others discard." The words poured out of him like water from a broken dam, all the pain and frustration of years of suffering finally finding voice. The dove listened without interrupting, her dark eyes full of compassion and understanding. When he finally fell silent, exhausted by his own confession, she remained quiet for a moment, as if weighing what she had heard, as if considering how to respond to such deep despair. The prairie around them had grown quiet too, the usual sounds of evening settling into a profound stillness. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "And you, dove?" asked the crow with a sad voice. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to heaven on an errand," responded the dove with serenity. "To heaven?" murmured the crow in astonishment. Upon hearing this, something inside the crow flickered like a weak spark among ashes. "Friend dove, could you do me a favor?" he said, with eyes on the verge of tears. "Since you're going to heaven, ask about me. Ask God if he still remembers this wretch, if one day this life of pain will end. And please also ask what I should do to stop being unhappy and bring me the answer." "Very well, friend crow, I will do that." The dove said goodbye to the crow and began her journey to heaven. She crossed clouds, winds, and silences until she reached the celestial gates. There, an angel awaited her with a serene smile. "Welcome, traveler. What brings you here?" "I come to deliver some messages," she replied. The angel listened patiently, and when the celestial matters were finished, he asked, "Do you need anything else? Any special request?" The dove was silent for a few seconds, and then remembered the sad eyes of the crow, his faded voice, his words full of pain. "Yes," she said finally. "Today I met a crow on the prairie. He's tired of suffering. He feels forgotten, worthless, and troubled by many problems. He asked me to inquire about him to God. He wants to know if his pain and unhappiness will ever end." The angel lowered his gaze with compassion and told her, "His destiny is written. 10 years of suffering await him. So it was determined before his birth." The dove, saddened, murmured, "If I tell him that, he will lose all hope. He barely has any strength left. Isn't there something more I can do?" The angel thought for a moment and then, with a soft voice, responded, "Tell him to repeat this. Thank you, God, for everything. Tell him to repeat this in all situations. That is his test and his path to transform everything." The dove descended slowly, her wings catching the last rays of the setting sun. She understood the weight of the message she carried, understood that words that seemed so simple might be dismissed or misunderstood by a creature in such deep despair. But she also understood that sometimes the most profound truths are the simplest ones, and that transformation often comes not from grand gestures or dramatic changes, but from small, consistent shifts in perspective. As she flew back toward the prairie, she prayed silently that the crow would have the faith to try, the courage to believe even when belief seemed foolish, the strength to persist even when the path seemed pointless. The crow was waiting in the same place. The sun had crossed the sky and night was beginning to fall. Although he was weak, he still had hope. A small part of him wished to hear something that would change his life forever. Then he saw her. The dove descended gently, floating with peace. "You came back?" whispered the crow. "Yes, friend crow, and I bring your answer." The crow rose slowly. His gaze trembled between anxiety and faith. "What did God say? What will become of me?" The dove looked at him tenderly and told him, "God has written 10 more years of suffering for you, but the angel gave me a message. He told me to have you repeat these words at all times, no matter what happens. Thank you, God, for everything. This is your test and also your path. The crow looked at her in silence. He had expected something more, something that would free him immediately. And with a faded voice, disappointed, he murmured, "Is that all?" "Yes, that's all," responded the dove gently. "But sometimes a single phrase can change everything." The crow, somewhat sad, nodded. "If that's my test, then I will do it." The dove prepared to leave, but before she flew away, she turned back to him one more time. "Remember, friend crow, the words themselves are not magic. It's what they do to your heart that matters. Speak them, but also try to feel them, even if it seems impossible at first. The path will reveal itself as you walk it." And with that, she rose into the darkening sky and disappeared into the distance. The crow was left alone, looking at the sky. He didn't understand how a simple phrase could alleviate so much suffering. But deep down, he had nothing to lose. That night, while the cold wind blew across the prairie, he closed his eyes, pressed his wings against his body, and murmured with a trembling voice, "Thank you, God, for everything." The words felt foreign in his beak, unnatural, almost like a lie. How could he thank God for a life of suffering? How could he express gratitude for rejection and pain? But he had promised the dove, and more importantly, he had no other option. So he said the words, even though they felt hollow, even though they seemed meaningless. The next day, hunger came to punish him again. He walked for hours without finding food. He fell to his knees under the sun and still said, "Thank you, God, for everything." His feathers continued to fall, his body continued to be weak. Sometimes he found only dried skin and still murmured, "Thank you, God, for everything." And so, day after day, without understanding why, he repeated the phrase with faith. With each step, with each blow, with each silence, not because he felt good, but because he decided to trust. And something invisible began to change very slowly. The days blurred together into a monotonous sequence of struggle and repetition. The crow would wake each morning, his body aching and tired, and before even opening his eyes fully, he would whisper the words, "Thank you, God, for everything." He said them when he found food and when he didn't. He said them when the rain soaked his feathers and when the sun scorched his back. He said them when other birds mocked him and when he spent entire days without seeing another living creature. At first, the practice felt mechanical, like a chore he had assigned himself, a promise he was reluctantly keeping. But as the days turned into weeks, something subtle began to shift. He noticed that the words themselves, regardless of his feelings about them, created a small space in his mind, a moment of pause before the automatic patterns of resentment and complaint could take hold. One morning, after many days of repeating the phrase, he noticed that his wings no longer hurt as much, that his feathers were less rough, that the sky seemed bluer. That afternoon, dark clouds began to gather. The wind changed, and for the first time in years, it rained on the prairie. The dry earth drank eagerly. Small green plants sprouted. A puddle transformed into a small pond, and the crow finally drank fresh water. The next day, he found food. It wasn't a rotten carcass, but recent meat from an animal that had died of natural causes. He ate, he drank, he breathed deeply, looked at the sky, and, this time, with his heart full, said aloud, "Thank you, God, for everything." But the transformation wasn't just about external circumstances improving. Something deeper was happening inside him. He began to notice things he had never noticed before. The way the morning light painted the grass with gold, the intricate patterns in a bird's song, the feeling of wind beneath his wings when he flew. These things had always been there, but he had been so consumed by his misery that he had been blind to them. Now, with each repetition of, "Thank you, God, for everything," his awareness expanded, his capacity for appreciation grew, his ability to find meaning in small moments deepened. A few more days passed. He was no longer the same. His body was still that of a crow, but his soul was no longer the one that dragged shame. Now he flew without weight, not because the world had changed, but because his heart had changed. He stopped complaining about his situation and instead learned to accept difficulties and act with wisdom and calm in the face of them. He realized that fighting against what he couldn't change only made him more unhappy, and he focused on what he could change. Each dawn was received with gratitude, each small discovery, a fresh breeze, a drop of water, a shadow to rest in, was enough to say, "Thank you, God, for everything." He no longer compared himself to other birds. He no longer hated his reflection. The crow was now happy. Then he clearly realized he was not a curse, he was necessary. His existence had a greater purpose: to clean the earth, to prevent disease, to return balance to nature. He was not beautiful in the eyes of the world, but he was valuable in the eyes of creation. And for the first time, he felt proud to be who he was. He looked at the sky with a serene soul and said, "Thank you, God, for everything." This realization came to him gradually, not as a sudden epiphany, but as a slow dawning of understanding. He began to see how his role, though unglamorous, was essential. Without him and others like him, the prairie would be littered with decaying flesh, breeding grounds for disease that could spread to all creatures. He was part of a vast, interconnected system, and his part, though humble, was vital. One day, he encountered a young sparrow who looked at him with disgust and said, "Why do you eat such horrible things? Don't you have any dignity?" In the past, such words would have crushed him, would have reinforced all his negative beliefs about himself. But now he simply smiled, a gesture that surprised even himself, and replied, "I eat what I am meant to eat, and in doing so, I keep the prairie healthy for you and all others. We each have our role, young one. I have learned to honor mine." The sparrow flew away, confused by his response, but the crow felt no anger, no resentment. He felt instead a quiet confidence, a peaceful acceptance of his place in the world. He began to notice other changes too. Other crows, who had previously avoided him because of his obvious misery, now approached him. They sensed something different about him, a calmness, a contentment that was unusual among their kind. He shared with them what he had learned, told them about the dove and the angel's message, encouraged them to try the practice of gratitude. Some listened, some dismissed him as foolish, but he didn't mind. He had found his peace, and whether others found theirs was their own journey to walk. As the seasons changed, the crow who had once wished for death now woke each morning with a quiet joy. The prairie that had seemed like a prison now felt like home. The work that had felt like a curse now felt like a calling. He had not changed what he was. He was still a crow, still ate carrion, still was avoided by many other creatures. But everything had changed because he had changed. His transformation began to affect those around him in ways both subtle and profound. The young sparrow who had questioned his dignity came back several weeks later, this time with a different demeanor. "I've been thinking about what you said," the sparrow admitted. "I've been watching you, and you seem happier than many birds who have everything they could want. How is that possible?" The crow thought for a moment before responding. "Happiness doesn't come from having an easy life or being admired by others. It comes from accepting what is and finding the sacred in it. Every morning I say, 'Thank you, God, for everything,' and I mean it. Not because everything is good, but because I choose to trust that there is purpose in all things, even the things I don't understand." The sparrow flew away thoughtfully, and the crow hoped his words might plant a seed of wisdom in the young bird's heart. He remembered his own journey, how resistant he had been to the angel's simple message, how foolish it had seemed at first. But he had been desperate enough to try, and that desperation had been, paradoxically, a kind of grace. The prairie continued its eternal cycles, seasons turning, life emerging and fading, the endless dance of existence carrying on as it always had. But for one crow, everything was different. He had learned one of life's most profound lessons, that the external circumstances of life matter far less than the internal attitude we bring to them. He had learned that gratitude is not something you feel when life is good, but rather a practice you commit to, regardless of circumstances, a practice that eventually transforms everything. Other animals began to notice him too. A wise old coyote, the same one who had once chased him away from a kill, now nodded respectfully when their paths crossed. A deer, drinking from the same pond, did not startle at his approach. Even the hawks and eagles, those majestic birds he had once envied so desperately, seemed to regard him differently, not with disdain, but with a kind of neutral acceptance. He was a crow. They were what they were, and each had their place in the great tapestry of prairie life. Sometimes we believe that life is unfair. We compare ourselves, we complain, we ask ourselves why others seem to have everything while we only have trials, rejections, silences. But what this story teaches us is something profound. We can't always change what we are, but we can change the place from which we live our life. The crow didn't stop being a crow. He didn't become a hawk or an eagle. He didn't need new wings or a different body. What changed was his heart. And that changed everything. Because when we stop cursing what we were given, when we release the complaint and embrace gratitude, something inside us is freed. We begin to see that the pain was not punishment, it was part of the process, that our value is not in what we look like, but in what we contribute. Gratitude is not resignation, it is transformation. It is choosing to give thanks even when we don't understand. It is trusting when there are no signs. And that, in the end, returns life to us. So, if today you are going through a desert, if you feel that the only thing you do is survive, don't give up. Maybe you don't yet see the purpose, but there is one, and it is greater than you imagine. Just make the attempt. Say with all your heart, "Thank you, God, for everything." And watch how, little by little, something inside you begins to fly higher. The crow's story spread across the prairie, carried by the dove who had brought him the message, shared by the sparrows who had witnessed his transformation, whispered among the creatures who had seen a miserable scavenger become a contented soul. And in each telling, the message remained the same, that the power to change our lives lies not in changing our circumstances, but in changing our hearts, that gratitude is the key that unlocks the prison of resentment and complaint, that even in the darkest suffering, there is a path to peace. Years passed, and the crow grew old. His feathers turned more gray, his flight became slower, his body began to show the signs of a long life lived on the harsh prairie. But his spirit remained light, his heart remained grateful, his purpose remained clear. And when his final day came, as it comes for all creatures, he faced it without fear or regret. He had lived a life that began in despair and ended in peace, a life that proved transformation is always possible, a life that showed the simple power of 3 words, repeated with faith. Thank you, God, for everything. Before we part, I want to share something with you. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story touched you. Maybe you see yourself in the crow's struggles, or maybe you've already begun your own journey of transformation. I invite you not just to subscribe to this channel, but to join a community of people who believe in the power of gratitude and perspective. Share your own story in the comments below. Tell us about a time when gratitude changed something for you, or if you're struggling right now, let us know. Sometimes, the simple act of putting our pain into words begins the healing process. And when you share this video with someone you love, you might be giving them exactly what they need at exactly the right moment. Remember, you are not alone in your struggles. Every creature faces challenges. Every soul knows pain. But not every heart discovers the secret that can transform it all. The crow found his answer in 3 simple words, repeated with faith even when faith seemed foolish. What will your 3 words be? What practice will you commit to, even when it feels pointless, trusting that something invisible is shifting inside you? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and the transformation of a lifetime can begin with a single phrase spoken with intention and faith. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And may you find your own path to gratitude, whatever that looks like in your life.